Welcome back to Vietnamese Vixens. Today's story is about a man who thought he'd finally gotten love right the second time around, only to discover that in Vietnam, marriage doesn't always mean what you think it means. This is David Chen's story, a 52-year-old software consultant from Vancouver, Canada, who came to Hanoi looking for a fresh start and found something that felt like destiny. He met a woman, fell hard, married her within months, and started building what he thought was their future together. But when it came time to buy their dream house, a lawyer sat him down and explained something that changed everything. He learned that under Vietnamese law, foreign husbands don't have the same rights as Vietnamese citizens, and that the money he was about to spend could legally vanish the moment he signed the paperwork. By the time David understood what he'd walked into, he was already $500,000 deep with almost nothing to show for it. If you've ever considered marrying someone in Southeast Asia, or if you know someone who has, this story might save you from making the same mistakes David did. Drop a comment below and let us know where you're watching from. If you've had similar experiences or know someone who has, hit that like button and subscribe because these stories need to be heard. Now, here's David's account, in his own words. I landed in Hanoi 3 years ago with 2 suitcases, a consulting contract, and the kind of exhaustion that seeps into your bones after a decade of grinding in the Vancouver tech scene. Dry Don Juan was 52, recently divorced, burnt out in ways I didn't have words for yet. My ex-wife had taken the house, half my retirement, and most of my confidence. The consulting gig was 6 months, good money, and I figured I'd work remotely from somewhere warm where my dollar stretched further and nobody knew my name. Vietnam wasn't some sex tourism thing. I need to say that up front because I know what people think. I was just tired. I wanted air that didn't taste like rain and failure. I wanted mornings that felt different. Those first weeks in Hanoi did something to me. I'd wake up at dawn to the sound of motorbikes humming through the streets like a mechanical river. The air smelled like gasoline and coffee, and fresh herbs from the market vendors setting up on the sidewalk. I'd walk down to Hoang Kiem Lake and watch old people doing Tai Chi, while teenagers took selfies by the water. Everything moved at this rhythm I'd never experienced. Fast, but not frantic. Crowded, but not crushing. I'd sit at street corner cafes drinking Vietnamese coffee so strong it felt like it was waking up parts of my brain that had been asleep for years. The heat was oppressive but honest. You sweated through your shirt by 9 in the morning and nobody cared. There was something about that I found freeing. I wasn't looking for a woman. That's the truth. After the divorce, I'd convinced myself I was done with all that. But about 2 months in, I was working from this cafe in the old quarter. The kind of place with plastic stools and Wi-Fi that cut out every 10 minutes. And this woman sat down at the table next to mine. She was maybe 35, wearing a simple white blouse and jeans, had her hair pulled back, and she was on her phone speaking English to someone about hotel bookings and guest complaints. Professional. Competent. When she hung up, she caught me looking and smiled. Not the practiced smile I'd seen from bar girls in the tourist areas, just a regular smile. Her name was Lynn. She worked in hospitality management for a hotel chain, had done a semester abroad in Australia years ago, which explained the perfect English, and she had this quality where she listened to you like what you were saying actually mattered. We started talking about nothing important, the terrible Wi-Fi, the best places for pho, how Hanoi traffic looked like chaos but somehow functioned. She asked what brought me to Vietnam, and I told her the boring truth. Tech consulting needed to change. She nodded like she understood without me having to explain the divorce, or the burnout, or the feeling that I'd spent 20 years building a life that turned out to be someone else's life. We met for coffee the next day, then dinner. Then she took me to places tourists never see. Family-run restaurants in alleys so narrow, you had to turn sideways between the motorbikes. A temple outside the city where her grandmother used to take her as a kid. We drove out to Ha Long Bay one weekend and stayed in a hotel overlooking the limestone karsts, rising out of the water like something from a dream. She translated everything for me, not just language but context. Why people did things certain ways, what gestures meant, how to navigate situations without offending anyone. She made Vietnam feel less foreign. She made it feel like home. I fell for her. I'm not going to pretend otherwise or act like one kept my guard up. She was kind and smart and funny, and she seemed to genuinely enjoy spending time with me. Her family welcomed me with this warmth I hadn't experienced in years. Her parents invited me to their house for dinner, and her mother kept piling more food on my plate, and her father wanted to hear about Canada, and they treated me like I was already part of the family. Lynn's younger brother joked with me in broken English. Her aunts asked when we were getting married. It felt good. It felt real. 6 months into seeing each other, Lynn brought it up over dinner at a restaurant near West Lake. She wasn't pushy about it. She just said, if we're serious about this, about building something together, getting married makes things easier legally. For visas, for living arrangements, for everything. She said it like it was the practical next step. I'd been thinking the same thing honestly. My consulting contract was extending indefinitely, and I had no real reason to go back to Canada. My kids from my first marriage were adults living their own lives. Vancouver felt like a place I used to know, so I said yes. We got married 3 months later at a small ceremony in her village, about 2 hours outside Hanoi. Her entire extended family showed up. Her parents were beaming. Her grandmother cried. I wore a suit that was too hot for the weather and stood there sweating while a local official read things in Vietnamese that Lynn translated for me in whispers. Afterward, there was this huge feast with distant cousins and neighbors and people I'd never met before, all celebrating like it was their own wedding. I felt like I'd finally gotten something right. Like this was what life was supposed to feel like. Like I'd stumbled into the good ending after years of getting it wrong. Then about 4 months into the marriage, Lynn started talking about buying a house. We were renting a decent apartment in Tay Ho, but she said it was throwing money away. We should invest. Build equity. She'd been looking at properties and found this beautiful house near West Lake. 3 bedrooms, small garden, renovated kitchen, quiet street. The asking price was 12 billion Vietnamese dong. I did the math, with the exchange rate sitting at about 26,300 dong to the dollar. That worked out to around 456,000 US dollars. It was a lot of money, but not insane for what you got. I had it. The divorce settlement from my ex-wife, my retirement savings, equity from selling my Vancouver condo. I've been careful with money my whole life. This felt like a good investment in our future. Lynn was excited. She showed me photos on her phone, walked me through the neighborhood, talked about how we could set up a home office for my consulting work, maybe turn 1 bedroom into a guest room for when my kids visited, plant vegetables in the garden, grow old there. She painted this picture and I wanted it. I wanted it so badly, I didn't stop to ask the questions I should have asked. We made an offer. Put down 200 million dong as earnest money, about 7,600 US dollars. The seller accepted. Lynn scheduled a meeting with a lawyer to handle the paperwork, and I showed up thinking it would be a formality, just signing documents, transferring funds. Standard real estate transaction. The lawyer's office was small and professional. Air-conditioned, certificates on the walls. The lawyer was a middle-aged Vietnamese man who spoke careful English and started walking us through the process. He explained about the certificate of land use rights and ownership of houses, the Pink Book, how property ownership works in Vietnam. Then he got to the part that made my stomach drop. He said, very calmly, that foreign individuals are not allowed to own land in Vietnam under any circumstances, even if you're married to a Vietnamese citizen. The land law supersedes the family law. Which means that even though Lynn and I were married, even though we'd be using my money to buy the house, the property could only be registered in her name, and not as community property. It had to be registered as her separate property. I must have looked confused because he explained further. He said that in order to get the Pink Book issued in Lynn's name only, I would need to sign a legal document called an acknowledgement of separate property, essentially a waiver. In this document, I would formally state that I acknowledge the house is being purchased with Lynn's separate funds, that it is her sole property, and that I waive all rights to the property whatsoever. He said, if I didn't sign the waiver, we couldn't proceed with the purchase. The land registration office wouldn't issue the Pink Book. It was sign or walk away. I looked at Lynn. She was looking at the lawyer. Then she turned to me and squeezed my hand and said, it's just paperwork, honey. We're married. What's mine is yours. This is just how things work here. The lawyer kept talking about ways to protect my investment, drafting agreements, setting up contracts, but his voice sounded far away. All I could think about was that I was about to transfer 456,000 US dollars to buy a house that would legally be 100% owned by someone else, that I would sign a legal document saying I had zero claim to it, that if anything went wrong, if the marriage fell apart, if she changed her mind about anything, I would have no recourse whatsoever. But we'd already put down the earnest money. We'd already told her family. We'd already started planning our life in that house. And she was sitting there holding my hand, looking at me with those eyes that had made me feel at home in a foreign country. and I couldn't imagine her doing anything to hurt me. She was my wife. We'd made vows. This was just how things worked in Vietnam. Every foreign husband went through this. It was fine. It had to be fine. The lawyer slid the document across the desk and handed me a pen, and I sat there staring at it, trying to convince myself that signing my name wouldn't be the biggest mistake of my life. I signed the waiver. What else was I going to do? Walk away from the earnest money? Tell Lynn I didn't trust her after everything? Watch her family's faces fall when we explained we weren't buying the house after all? The lawyer notarized the document, and I wired the full 12 billion dong from my Canadian account. It took 3 days to clear. During those 3 days, Lynn was happier than I'd ever seen her, planning where furniture would go, talking about paint colors, showing her mother photos. When the pink book arrived 2 weeks later with only her name printed on it, she hung it in a frame in our bedroom. Our bedroom in the house I'd just bought but didn't legally own. The first few months in that house were good, though. I need to be honest about that. It felt like we were building something. Lynn would wake up early and make breakfast. I'd work from the home office we'd set up in the spare bedroom. She'd bring me coffee mid-morning and kiss the top of my head. We'd have lunch together in the garden. In the evenings, we'd walk around Westlake or meet her friends for dinner. It felt domestic in a way my first marriage never had. Like we were actually partners. Then Lynn quit her job at the hotel. She said she wanted to focus on making our home beautiful, on being there for me, that I was working so hard, and she wanted to take care of things. I was making about $8,000 a month for my consulting work, and we were living comfortably on half that, so I didn't object. It felt nice, actually. Having someone there when I finished work, having meals cooked, having the house run smoothly without me thinking about it. She seemed happy not working. I figured if we could afford it, why not? She started remodeling almost immediately. The kitchen needed updating, she said. The cabinets were old. The countertops were stained. She showed me designs on Pinterest. Modern appliances, stone countertops, better lighting. The quote came back at $4,500. I transferred the money. Then the bathrooms. The tiles were cracked. The fixtures were ancient. She wanted rainfall shower heads and heated towel racks and floating vanities. That was another $3,200. Then furniture. The stuff that came with the house was garbage, she said. We needed a proper dining table, a real couch, a decent bed frame. She took me to furniture stores, and I'd watch her negotiate in Vietnamese, and then she'd tell me the price, and I'd transfer the money. $6,000 for furniture that looked like every other furniture I'd ever seen. I didn't mind, not really. It was our house, or her house, whatever. We were married. What was mine was hers. That's what marriage meant. And she'd light up when the new kitchen was finished, or when the furniture was delivered and arranged just how she wanted it. She'd thank me, tell me I was so generous. We'd christen each newly renovated room, and I'd feel like I was investing in us, in our future. Then, her cousin approached us with a business opportunity. His name was Tuan, and he wanted to open a cafe near West Lake, prime location, tourist area, steady foot traffic. He had the retail space lined up and the concept planned, but needed investors. Lynn was excited about it. She said it would be passive income for us. That Tuan was smart and hardworking. That this was the kind of opportunity expats missed because they didn't have family connections. The initial investment was 800 million dong. I did the math. About $30,400. That was a lot of money for a cafe I knew nothing about in a country where I didn't understand business regulations. I hesitated. Lynn noticed. She got quiet. Said she understood if I didn't trust her family. That she knew I came from a divorce where money was a weapon and maybe I couldn't help being suspicious. That hurt. The way she said it made me feel small and damaged. Like I was bringing my baggage into something pure. So I transferred the money. Tuan was grateful. Came to her house with a bottle of expensive whiskey. Talked about return on investment and profit margins in English that was harder to understand than Lynn's. She translated the parts he couldn't articulate, and I nodded along. The cafe opened 3 months later. Lynn took me there on opening day. It looked nice, modern, clean. Good location like Tuan had promised. But I never saw financial statements. When I asked Lynn about it casually a month in, she said Tuan was still figuring out the books, getting established. These things took time. I let it drop. Another month passed, then another. I brought it up again. How was the cafe doing? Were we seeing any return yet? Lynn got defensive, said Tuan was working his ass off, and maybe I should trust the process instead of hovering like some investor checking quarterly reports. She said it like I was being unreasonable. I started noticing things, small things at first. Everything was in Lynn's name. The house, obviously, but also the car I'd bought her 6 months into the marriage. She'd wanted a Honda CR-V, said it was practical, safe. Good for when we had kids. That last part made me smile. Kids. A future. The CR-V cost 950 million dong, about 36,100 US dollars. I didn't blink, but when the registration came through, it was her name only. Same with the joint bank account we'd opened. Joint in theory, but structured with her as the primary account holder and me as a signatory, meaning she had full control and I could access it, but only with her permission, essentially. When I suggested restructuring it so we both had equal standing, she looked at me like I'd slapped her. She said after everything I'd done for her, after how she'd opened her life and her family to me, I still didn't trust her. She cried. I backed off. Her family started asking for money. Not demanding. Asking. Lynn's brother's kid needed surgery, some kind of respiratory thing. The family didn't have good insurance. $5,000 would cover it. I sent the money. Her mother's house needed repairs. The roof was leaking. Rainy season was coming. $3,500. I sent it. Her nephew was applying to university. Needed money for tuition and fees. $2,800. I sent it. Each time Lynn was grateful. She'd thank me, tell me I was saving her family. That they talked about what a good man I was, how lucky she was to have married someone so generous. The affection afterward was good. She'd be extra attentive. Cook my favorite meals. Suggest we book a hotel room in Da Nang for the weekend. It felt like reinforcement, like I was being a good husband and being rewarded for it. But the requests kept coming. Her aunt needed money for her daughter's wedding. Her cousin's business partner needed a short-term loan. Her father needed dental work that wasn't covered by whatever healthcare system existed here. Every few weeks there was something new, and Lynn would present it carefully, apologetically. She'd say she knew she was asking a lot, that her family wasn't my responsibility, but also they were family now. And in Vietnamese culture, when you have the means, you help family. That's just what you do. She made me feel like saying no would be culturally insensitive, like it would prove I was just another foreigner who didn't understand. One night, about 18 months into the marriage, I couldn't sleep. Lynn was asleep next to me, breathing softly, and I was staring at the ceiling, doing math in my head. The house. 456,000 US dollars. The kitchen remodel. 4,500. The bathroom renovations. 3,200. The furniture. 6,000. The car. 36,100. The cafe investment. 30,400. The surgery for her nephew. 5,000. Her mother's roof. 3,500. The university tuition. 2,800. The wedding. 4,000. The business loan. 8,000. The dental work. 2,200. I was forgetting stuff, but I got my phone and opened my banking app and started going through transactions, converting dong to dollars, adding it up. $620,000. In 18 months, I'd spent $620,000, and I couldn't point to a single thing that was legally mine. The house had Lynn's name on the pink book, and 5,000 signed a document waiving all claims. The car was registered to her. The cafe investment had no paperwork showing my stake, just bank transfers to Tuan's account. The family loans had no promissory notes, no repayment terms, nothing that would hold up legally. Even the renovations and furniture, they'd increased the value of a house I had zero legal claim to. I had receipts, I had bank statements, but I didn't have ownership. I didn't have contracts. I didn't have anything that would matter in a court. I lay there feeling something cold spread through my chest. How had I let this happen? I'd been so careful with money my whole life. I'd worked hard, saved, invested properly, built retirement accounts and college funds and emergency savings. Then I'd come to Vietnam, and in 18 months, I'd hemorrhaged over $500,000 with nothing to show for it except a wife who controlled every asset we had. I decided I needed to be smart about this, careful. I waited a few days until things felt calm and easy between us. Then over dinner, I brought it up. I said I'd been thinking about our finances, that we should probably formalize some things. Maybe see if we could add my name to the house deed somehow. Structure the cafe investment properly so we had documentation of ownership. Set up repayment terms for the family loans so we could track things. I said it gently, casually, like it was just good financial planning. Lynn stopped eating. She put her chopsticks down and stared at me. Then she asked what I was really saying. I told her I wasn't saying anything, just that we should organize things properly. She asked if I thought she was stealing from me. I said, of course not. She asked if I thought her family was scamming me. I said no. She asked then, what the fuck was I implying? She'd never cursed at me before. Her voice was sharp and cold, and nothing like the voice that had told me she loved me 1,000 times. She stood up from the table, said she couldn't believe that after everything she'd sacrificed for me, after giving up her career to make our home, after opening her entire family to me, I was treating her like some kind of criminal, like a gold digger. She said I was just like every other foreigner who came to Vietnam thinking Vietnamese women were trying to trap them, that she'd thought I was different, but clearly she was wrong. She was crying now, angry crying. She said maybe I should go back to Canada if I trusted her so little. She went into the bedroom and locked the door. I sat at the dinner table, alone, looking at her half-eaten meal. I felt like shit. Like I'd accused her of something terrible, when all I'd wanted was to organize our finances properly. Like I'd ruined everything by being suspicious and small, and carrying divorce trauma into a good marriage. I slept on the couch that night. She didn't speak to me the next day, or the day after that. She'd move through the house like I wasn't there, wouldn't make eye contact. When I tried to apologize, she'd walk away. On the third day, I tried again. Said I was sorry, that I'd been insensitive, that I trusted her completely and I didn't need to change anything about how we handled money. She looked at me for a long time. Then she said, okay, but her voice was different, flatter. She started speaking to me again, but the warmth was gone. She stopped bringing me coffee while I worked, stopped cooking the meals I liked, started spending more time at her mother's house. I asked if we were okay. She said we were fine, but we weren't fine. Something had shifted. She was pulling away, and I didn't know how to fix it. I started trying harder. Suggested trips. Offered to take her shopping. Asked about her day and actually listened. Gradually, the warmth came back. A little. But it felt conditional now. Like I was on probation. Like I had to keep proving myself. And through all of it, I kept thinking about that number. $620,000. Everything in her name. Every asset controlled by her. And I'd signed legal documents authorizing it. I'd waived my rights to the house. I'd transferred money without contracts. I'd loaned cash to her family without promissory notes. I'd built a life that looked like our life, but was legally her life. And when I'd tried to change that, even gently, even reasonably, she'd made me feel like the bad guy. I lay in bed at 3 in the morning, staring at the ceiling of the house I'd bought but didn't own, listening to Lynn breathe next to me. And I understood with perfect clarity that I was fucked. I walked into a trap so obvious that other men must have seen it coming from miles away. But I'd been lonely and tired, and I'd wanted so badly to believe I'd found something real that I'd ignored every warning sign. I'd signed away everything. And now, 18 months in, I was starting to wonder if the woman sleeping next to me had ever loved me at all, or if she'd just been smart enough to recognize a lonely foreign man with money and patient enough to wait for him to hand it all over. I waited 2 weeks before I did anything. I wanted to make sure I wasn't overreacting, that I wasn't letting paranoia from my first divorce poison something good. But the feeling wouldn't go away. That cold certainty that I'd made a terrible mistake and needed to understand exactly how bad it was. So I found a different lawyer, not the one who'd handled the house purchase. An expat specialist recommended on a forum for foreigners living in Vietnam. His office was in a newer building in the business district. Western-style setup. He'd worked with foreign nationals for 15 years. His consultation fee was $250 for 2 hours. I paid it. I laid everything out for him. The house purchase and the separate property waiver I'd signed. The car registered in Lynn's name. The cafe investment with her cousin. The family loans. The joint bank account structured with her as primary holder. The renovations and furniture. All the money that had flowed out of my accounts into things I couldn't legally claim. I showed him bank statements, transfer records. The pink book with only her name. He listened without interrupting, took notes. When I finished, he sat back in his chair and was quiet for a minute, like he was deciding how honest to be. Then he told me I was in serious trouble. He said he saw cases like mine all the time, and they almost never ended well for the foreign spouse. He walked me through the legal reality piece by piece, and it was worse than I'd imagined. Under Vietnamese family law, property acquired during marriage is normally considered community property. 50-50 split in a divorce. But there were massive exceptions that applied directly to my situation, and I hadn't understood any of them. First, the house. Because I'd signed the acknowledgement of separate property waiver, the house was 100% Lynn's property legally, not community property, not even partially mine. The waiver I'd signed explicitly stated that the house was purchased with her separate funds and that I had no claim to it whatsoever. It didn't matter that my money had paid for it. It didn't matter that we were married. I'd signed a legal document waiving all rights, and that document would hold up in any Vietnamese court. The lawyer said foreign husbands sign these waivers all the time without understanding what they're actually signing. They think it's just bureaucratic paperwork required for the purchase. They don't realize they're permanently giving up any legal claim to an asset they're paying for. He said I had zero chance of claiming any portion of that house. Zero. Second, the cafe investment. Without proper contracts or business registration showing my stake in the business, the 800 million dong I'd transferred to her cousin was legally considered a gift. Not an investment, not a loan, a gift. The lawyer said that in Vietnamese law, if you transfer money to someone without a written agreement specifying terms of repayment or ownership stake, it's presumed to be a voluntary gift. I'd sent the money based on verbal promises and family trust. That meant nothing legally. The cafe was entirely Tuan's business. I had no claim to any profits, no ownership percentage, nothing. That $30,400 was gone. Unrecoverable. Third, the car. That was slightly better, but not much. The CRV was technically community property, since it had been purchased during the marriage. In a divorce, it would be subject to division. But Lynn could argue it was a gift to her specifically. And even if I won that argument, best case scenario was a 50-50 split of the car's current value. Not the 950 million dong I'd paid, but whatever it was worth now after depreciation. Maybe I'd get $15,000 back from a $36,000 purchase. Maybe. Fourth, all the money I'd loaned to her family. The $5,000 for her nephew's surgery. The $3,500 for her mother's roof. The $2,800 for university tuition. The $4,000 for the wedding. All of it. Without promissory notes. Without written agreements. Without any documentation of repayment terms. Those were legally gifts. Not loans. Gifts. The lawyer said I could try to argue they were loans, but without anything in writing, I had almost no chance. Vietnamese courts would side with the family. They'd say I was a generous husband helping his wife's family, and now I was trying to retroactively claim they owed me money. It wouldn't work. That money was gone too. Fifth, the joint bank account. Lynn was the primary account holder. I was listed as a signatory, which gave me access but not control. The lawyer said she could remove me as a signatory anytime she wanted. She could also empty the entire account and I'd have no immediate recourse. I'd have to file complaints and go through bureaucratic channels, and by the time anything happened, the money would be long gone. He suggested I stop depositing money into that account immediately. Then he explained something that made my hands go numb. Inheritance law. He said I needed to understand what would happen if either of us died because the asymmetry was stunning. If Lynn died, Vietnamese law splits her assets between her spouse, her children, and her parents. Since we didn't have children together, her estate would be divided among me and her parents. But here's the thing. Most of our major assets were structured as her separate property. The house I'd paid for. She'd inherit nothing from it because it was already hers. If she died, her parents would get half and I'd get half. Except wait. The house was separate property, not community property. So actually, her parents would likely get the house entirely, or the vast majority of it. I might get some percentage, but probably not much. And the cafe investment. That was Tuan's business, nothing for me, the car. Maybe half. The money in the account. Whatever was left, split between me and her parents. But if I died? If I died, Lynn inherited everything from me as my spouse. My Canadian assets, my retirement accounts, my investments, everything I'd kept back home. Everything I hadn't yet moved to Vietnam, she'd get all of it. As my legal wife, she was my primary beneficiary unless I explicitly changed that. The lawyer asked if we'd done estate planning, if I'd updated my will after getting married. I shook my head. He said that meant right now, if I died tomorrow, Lynn would inherit my entire estate, probably close to $400,000 I still had in Canadian accounts. Meanwhile, if she died tomorrow, I'd get maybe $50,000 from assets I'd paid over $600,000 to acquire. The lawyer leaned forward and said this wasn't an accident. That Vietnamese law, whether intentionally or not, created a system where foreign spouses had almost no financial protection, where the legal framework was stacked heavily in favor of Vietnamese nationals. He said some women understood this system very well and used it deliberately. Others stumbled into it naturally because it was just how things worked here. But either way, the result was the same. Foreign men transferring their wealth to Vietnamese women who could walk away with everything while the men left with nothing. He asked if we had a prenuptial agreement. I almost laughed. Lin had told me Vietnamese people don't do prenups. That's suggesting one would insult her and her family, that it would imply I didn't trust her. The lawyer nodded like he'd heard that exact story 100 times before. He said prenups aren't common in Vietnamese culture, but they're legal and enforceable. That any Vietnamese woman who understood finances and wanted to protect both parties would have been open to discussing one. The fact that Lin had framed it as a cultural insult was a red flag I'd missed. I asked what my options were now. He said, limited. I could try to divorce and fight for a division of community property, but I'd already waived rights to the biggest asset. I could try to prove the cafe investment and family loans weren't gifts, but without documentation, I'd almost certainly lose. I could try to negotiate with Lin for a fair settlement, but if she didn't want to be fair, I had no leverage. My best option at this point was to stop the bleeding, stop transferring money, protect my remaining assets, move money back to Canada where she couldn't access it, update my will immediately, and document everything going forward. Every conversation, every transaction, everything. If this was heading toward divorce, I needed evidence. I left that lawyer's office and sat in my car for 20 minutes. The parking garage was underground and cool and dark, and I just sat there with my hands on the steering wheel, trying to absorb what I'd learned. I'd been married for less than 2 years, and I'd effectively transferred over $600,000 to someone who had no legal obligation to give any of it back. I'd signed documents waiving my rights. I'd made transfers without contracts. I'd believed promises that had no legal weight, and now I was trapped. If I stayed, the money would keep flowing out and I'd keep getting deeper. If I left, I'd walk away with almost nothing. Either way, I'd been comprehensively fucked. I decided I needed to test something. That night at dinner, I told Lin my consulting contract might not renew, that the company was restructuring and they were cutting remote contractors first. I said it casually, like I wasn't too worried, but that money might get tight for a while. I watched her face as I said it. The change was instant. The warmth in her eyes just vanished. She got very quiet. Said, oh. Asked if I'd be able to find other work. I said probably, but it might take a few months. She nodded slowly. Then she said she wasn't feeling well and went to bed early. This was at 7 in the evening. The next few days she was different. Distant. She stopped being affectionate. When I'd try to kiss her, she'd turn her head so I got her cheek instead of her lips. She was suddenly too tired for sex. She spent more time on her phone. Started saying she needed to visit her mother more often. The meals got simpler. Sometimes she wouldn't cook at all, just said she'd eaten at her mother's house already. When I suggested we go out for dinner, she said we should probably save money given my job situation. It was like a switch had flipped. After a week of this, I told her I was joking, that the contract had renewed and actually they'd given me a raise. The warmth came back immediately. She smiled, hugged me, said she'd been so worried. That night, she cooked my favorite meal, and afterward, we had sex for the first time in a week. Lying there afterward, I felt sick. I'd just proved what I'd suspected, that her affection was directly tied to my money. When she thought the money might stop, the affection stopped. When the money was secure again, the affection returned. I wasn't her husband. I was a financial arrangement. An ATM with feelings. I started making quiet moves. I opened a new bank account at a different bank that Lynn didn't know about. Started directing my consulting payments there instead of to the joint account. I told her the company changed their payment system and there were delays, but money was still coming. She believed it. I contacted my Canadian lawyer and updated my will. Made my adult kids from my first marriage the primary beneficiaries. Put Lynn down for a small amount, $10,000. Nothing that would make her rich if I died, but enough that she couldn't claim I'd cut her out entirely. I started photographing everything. Bank statements, transfer records, text messages where she'd asked for money. Photos of the pink book showing only her name, the separate property waiver, everything. And I stopped giving money to her family. When our aunt asked for help with something, I told Lynn that with work being uncertain, we needed to be careful. She got angry, said her family had helped us so much, and now I was turning my back on them. I said we could help once my situation stabilized. She said I was selfish, but I held firm. No more family loans. Lynn sensed something had changed. She started watching me more carefully, asking about my work more often, checking how much money was in the joint account. When she saw the balance was lower than expected, she asked where my payments were going. I said there were delays. She didn't believe me. She started going through my things when I was in the shower. I caught her looking through my laptop one morning. She said she was just checking her email. I said her phone was right there. Why would she use my computer? She got defensive. The tension kept building. Then one night, she brought up another investment opportunity. A friend of her cousin was opening a restaurant. Prime location, guaranteed returns. Only needed 500 million dong from us. About $19,000. I said no. She asked why not. I said we'd never seen returns from the cafe investment, and I wasn't investing more money without proper documentation. She stared at me, said I'd changed, that I wasn't the generous man she'd married, that I'd become suspicious and paranoid. I said I'd become realistic. She said maybe we needed to reevaluate things. I asked what that meant. She said maybe this marriage wasn't working, that if I didn't trust her, we didn't have anything. I looked at her sitting across from me in the house I'd bought, and I felt this weird calm, like a decision had been made without me having to make it. I said, okay, let's talk about divorce then. Her face went pale. She hadn't expected me to agree. She'd thought threatening divorce would make me fall in line, would make me scared enough to open my wallet again. But I just sat there calmly and said if that's what she wanted, we could discuss terms. She tried to backtrack, said she didn't really mean divorce, that she was just frustrated, that we could work through this. But something in her voice was different now. Calculating. She knew she'd lost control of the narrative, that I wasn't going to keep funding her lifestyle without question. Over the next few weeks, things got worse. We barely spoke. She spent most of her time at her mother's house. When she was home, she'd talk about the house like it was hers alone. My house, my car, my investment, never our anything. Finally, I told her I wanted a divorce. She cried, asked if there was someone else. I said no. She asked if I didn't love her anymore. I said I loved the person I thought she was, but I didn't know if that person had ever existed. She got angry then. Said I was just another foreigner who came to Vietnam to use women and throw them away. That she'd given up everything for me. I didn't argue. There was no point. The divorce process took 4 months. My lawyer negotiated, her lawyer negotiated. In the end, I got almost nothing. The house was hers, no question. The separate property waiver made that ironclad. The cafe investment. Gone. No documentation, no claim. The family loans, gone. No promissory notes, legally gifts. The car. We split the current value. After depreciation, that meant I got about $14,000 back from $36,000 invested. The joint bank account. We split what was left, which wasn't much because I'd moved most of my money out already. The renovations and furniture added value to her house, nothing for me. I walked away from a nearly 3-year marriage with about $80,000, from over $620,000 invested. I'd lost over $500,000. The house I'd paid $456,000 for was entirely hers. The cafe I'd invested $30,400 in was her cousin's. The car I'd bought for $36,000 was mostly hers. The money I'd loaned her family, over $25,000, was gone. The renovations and furniture I'd paid for, close to $14,000, increased the value of her property. Everything I'd built, everything I'd paid for, everything I'd invested in what I thought was our future, was legally hers. I moved into a small apartment in the city, 1 bedroom, 7th floor walk-up. About $400 a month. The place I'd lived before I met Lynn was nicer, but I couldn't afford that anymore. I'd burned through most of my savings. My retirement was damaged. I was 55 years old, starting over again with less than I'd had after my first divorce. But something unexpected happened. Other expats started reaching out. Men who'd heard my story somehow. Word travels in the foreign community. They shared their own experiences. One guy had invested in his wife's family business and lost $100,000. Another had bought a house the same way I did, signed the waiver, lost everything in the divorce. A third had married a woman who'd cleaned out their joint account and disappeared. There were patterns: the whirlwind romance, the family pressure, the investments and loans, the separate property waivers, the slow realization that nothing was in your name. The threats when you tried to change things. The same story playing out over and over with different details, but the same result. These men taught me things I wish I'd known before. They said never sign a separate property waiver under any circumstances. If you can't own property in your name, don't buy property. Rent. They said never put serious money into Vietnam. Keep your assets offshore where they're protected. They said get everything in writing. Every loan, every investment, every agreement. Notarize contracts that hold up in court. They said don't trust anyone, not the wife, not her family, not the lawyers she recommends. Get your own independent legal counsel. Some of them said don't get married at all. Just stay together without legal ties. That way, when it ends, you walk away clean. I didn't judge them anymore for being cynical. I understood now why they guarded their money, why they kept separate accounts, why they never put property in their wife's name, why they documented everything. Because Vietnamese law, whether by design or accident, creates a system where foreign husbands have almost no financial protection, where every major asset has to be in the Vietnamese spouse's name, where foreigners can't own land even if they're married, where loans without written contracts are gifts, where investments without proper documentation disappear, where the legal framework is so heavily weighted toward Vietnamese nationals that a foreign spouse can lose everything they've invested and have no recourse. I'm not saying all Vietnamese women are scammers. I need to be clear about that. I met good women in Vietnam, women with integrity, women who genuinely loved their foreign husbands and built real partnerships. But I'm saying the legal system makes it almost impossible to protect yourself if your marriage goes wrong. And by the time you realize the marriage is going wrong, it's way too late. The house is in her name, the car is in her name, the business is in her family's name, your money is in her account, and you sign documents, legal notarized documents, saying you have no claim to any of it. That's not a marriage. That's a transfer of assets with affection as collateral. And when the affection runs out, or when she realizes you're not going to keep transferring money indefinitely, you're left holding receipts for things you can never get back. You're left with bank statements showing $600,000 gone. You're left with memories of a woman who loved you right up until the moment you stopped being useful. And you're left wondering how you were stupid enough to fall for it. I'm making this video because maybe it'll save someone. Maybe some guy watching this is in the early stages of what I went through. Maybe he's just met a woman who seems perfect. Maybe she's talking about buying a house together. Maybe her family is asking for help. Maybe he thinks it'll be different for him. I thought that too. I thought Lynn was different. I thought our love was real enough that the legal stuff didn't matter. I was wrong. The legal stuff is the only thing that matters when love ends. And love ends a lot more often than we want to admit. So if you're that guy, here's what I'd tell you. Don't sign any documents waiving your property rights. Don't invest in businesses without proper contracts. Don't loan money to anyone without promissory notes. Keep your assets offshore. Get an independent lawyer, not one her family recommends. And for God's sake, get a prenuptial agreement. I don't care if she says it's not Vietnamese culture. I don't care if her family would be insulted. If she really loves you, she'll understand you need to protect yourself. And if she won't sign a prenup, if she makes you feel guilty for asking, if she frames financial protection as a lack of trust, then walk away. Because a woman who truly loves you will want you protected too. A woman who's planning to take everything won't. I lost over $500,000 learning this lesson. Maybe you don't have to. That's David's story, and we're grateful he was willing to share it so honestly. These situations are more common than many people realize, and understanding the legal framework before making major financial decisions can literally save your future. If you found this story valuable or know someone who needs to hear it, please share this video. Drop a comment below with your thoughts or your own experiences. And subscribe to Vietnamese Vixens for more real stories from expats navigating relationships in Southeast Asia. Stay safe out there, and remember, love is important, but legal protection is essential.